Rick Harrison, founder of Gold and Silver Pawn Shop and star of Pawn Stars, was once synonymous with dramatic negotiations and valuable antiques, but today he appeared in a completely different setting, the courtroom. When the judge announced his verdict, the room fell silent. Rick did not react violently, nor did he say a word, just remained silent with a heavy gaze, leaving many to wonder. What was he thinking in that moment? This video will take you back to that moment, to better understand Rick Harrison, not through television, but through a most intimate slice of his life. Pawn Stars was more than just a reality TV hit. It was a global cultural phenomenon. At its peak, millions of people across continents tuned into every episode. Families watched it together as a habit. Teachers incorporated segments into their lessons, and politicians even referenced the show in public speeches. But the journey didn't begin with a glamorous stage or a $1 million TV deal. It began in a small pawn shop in the heart of Las Vegas in the early 1980s. At the time, Rick Harrison was just a young man living with epilepsy since childhood, working day in and day out alongside his father, Richard Old Man Harrison, in an old shop. But behind that quiet exterior was a strong desire. Rick didn't just want to trade antiques. He wanted to tell stories, to bring history back with the most ordinary items. And he did it. From a young man behind the counter, Rick Harrison became a symbol of determination and change. He appeared on national television, was honored at award ceremonies, signed multi-million-dollar contracts, and built an image that millions loved. But like many success stories, the spotlight does not always shine to the end of the truth. In 2023, rumors began to appear. There was something unclear in the financial reports. Some valuable items were questioned about their origin. Revenues did not appear in the books. When investigations were launched, the public was shocked. The story quickly became the focus of the media, dividing public opinion into two opposing streams. One side believed that Rick had taken advantage of his fame, exceeded the limits of ethics and the law, and used his fame as a shield for personal gain. But there are also people who have collaborated, worked with, or known Rick, telling a different story. That Rick is not only a businessman, but also someone who has interacted with many influential figures, from politicians, high-ranking police officers, to figures in the elite. And that famous pawn shop, according to them, has been a stop for many valuable items, not only in terms of material value, but also historical factors, even politically sensitive. Some believe that Rick Harrison is not simply being investigated, but is being caught up in relationships, in layers of power far beyond what the public knows. That his image collapse is not necessarily the result of wrongdoing, but maybe the consequence of being too close to secrets that others want to keep secret. While all the hypotheses are still just speculation, one big question still hangs. Rick Harrison. Is he the one who made a mistake? Or is he the character being dragged into a game bigger than himself? Whatever the ultimate truth, there is no denying that from a small pawn shop in the desert of Las Vegas, Rick wrote a story that made the world stop and listen. A story of ambition, success, and untold darkness. Rick Harrison, a man, an icon, and a story that epitomizes modern America. Behind his familiar television image is an incredible journey, from a young man with epilepsy to the star of one of the most successful reality shows in history. But that journey, like many stories of rise, also has its dark side. The success of Pawn Stars comes not only from valuable antiques, but also from the connection between generations, between Rick, the principled father, Old Man, and his son, Corey. In each episode, the audience not only watches a transaction, but also listens to history, witnesses real-life stories wrapped up in each artifact. It is Rick Harrison's honesty, sharpness, and candor that make the show's unique brand, a blend of knowledge, entertainment, and emotional depth. By 2014, Gold and Silver Pawn was no longer just another run-of-the-mill Las Vegas store. It was a destination for more than 4,000 people a day, from tourists to celebrities to politicians. Rick became a familiar face, beloved around the world. But as the cameras dimmed, questions began to arise. Whispers of unusual expenses, dubious transactions, and artifacts that allegedly disappeared after going on air. At first, it was all just rumors. Until 2019, when an anonymous source filed a complaint with the Nevada Department of Revenue alleging that Rick had been underreporting his income for years. At first, it was just minor accounting errors, but then federal agencies got involved. A multi-agency investigation expanded beyond taxes to include art and antiques transactions. The prosecutor's allegations made headlines. According to them, Rick is suspected of hiding nearly $23 million through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts for 7 years. Some of the artifacts that the program has introduced are said to have unclear origins and may even be on the list of international circulation bans. However, Rick's side denies all of them. The legal team believes that this is not a simple criminal case, but an example of a famous person being used as a model for a large campaign. They argue that there is no clear evidence of wrongdoing and that many of the arguments are based on conjecture and indirect connections. The truth so far has not been clearly determined. But what is undeniable is Rick Harrison is not just a pawn shop owner, but a symbol of the American dream, where one can start from nothing and build a cultural empire. And that's why this story is so disturbing. If Rick's downfall were to actually happen, it would not only be the end of a TV character, but also a wake-up call about the fragile line between success, fame, and behind-the-scenes secrets. Under the scorching sun of a July morning in 2023, Las Vegas was rocked by an unprecedented scene. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Armed agents surrounded the gold and silver pawn shop as if conducting an anti-terror operation. Rick Harrison, once a beloved face of America, was arrested on the spot, handcuffed, before the stunned eyes of a growing crowd. Within minutes, his mugshot was plastered across newspapers and social media, and what had once been a television empire began to disintegrate before the eyes of the public. But the biggest shock was not the sight. What hurt Rick the most was the silence, or rather, the turning away from the very people who had praised him. The accolades faded, replaced by interviews that revealed a darker side from people who had been associated with him. Former employees, former business partners, even the appraisers who had appeared on the show. They shared their untold stories, the dark corners of the show, the suspicions that had simmered for years. But not everyone believed it. To millions of viewers who had grown up watching Pawn Stars, Rick remained an icon, not of a criminal, but of someone caught in a spiral that was beyond their control. Theories began to flourish. On YouTube, Reddit, and across social media platforms, people talked about what Rick might have known, something so sensitive that it had to be silenced. Some believed that the government had chosen him as a poster boy to demonstrate the severity of its fight against financial crime. Rick remained silent, no statement, no explanation, which only added to the confusion and skepticism. Then came the trial. From the very first days, from jury selection, it was clear that this would be no ordinary trial. There were no cameras, but every detail was relayed through news reports, notes, and articles from journalists present at the courthouse. Outside, Rick's supporters gathered, holding signs, chanting slogans. Inside, a tense legal confrontation played out day after day. The prosecution presented a carefully prepared array of evidence, from bank statements, internal emails, security footage, and lists of supposedly missing artifacts. They painted a portrait of a man fascinated by power and money, a Rick Harrison who was completely different from the friendly image he portrayed on television. They pointed to shell companies, offshore accounts, and years of shady dealings. In response, Rick's legal team did not sit idly by. They argued each allegation in turn, dissecting every financial detail. They brought in accounting experts who analyzed that many of the so-called suspicious expenses were actually investments, maintenance, or charitable donations. They questioned the entire investigative process, pointing out that one of the whistleblowers had been paid to provide information, questioning the objectivity of the entire case. To them, if there were errors in the books, it was a human error, not a criminal conspiracy. In the final days, Rick Harrison decided to testify. The courtroom was nearly silent when he took the stand. There were no cameras recording, but reporters described the moment as emotional. Rick opened with a sentence that left many speechless. "I have spent my life helping others understand the value of things, but I was not sober enough to realize the true value of the people around me." He looked back at the jury and continued, "I never did anything wrong on purpose. If I made a mistake, it was a mistake of faith, not of calculation." In that moment, Rick was no longer a famous television personality. He was just a human being, trying to hold on to something of himself in a world that was changing too quickly. But those emotions were not enough to change the outcome. After 13 hours of deliberation over 2 days, the jury returned and found Rick Harrison guilty on all the key charges. The trial ended, the verdict was read, and America was once again divided between faith and doubt. The gold and silver store was officially closed. The name Rick Harrison, once the pride of television, was now a memory. But the echoes remained. Rick's brief 27-second speech at the trial was widely shared, serving as a reminder that sometimes a person can carry so much weight on their shoulders that they don't even realize when they became an icon. And among the countless unanswered questions, one still haunts many. Is this story really over? Or is it just beginning? Under the blazing sun of the Nevada desert, the small pawn shop on Las Vegas Boulevard has gradually become an indispensable destination for locals and tourists from all over. They bring old items, sometimes even a part of their memories, to this place as a last hope. Rick Harrison, with his keen eyes and sincere conversation, does not just value the item. He listens to the story behind it. For Rick, each antique has a soul. And what is important is not only its material value, but how he cherishes the past it represents. Thanks to that, Gold and Silver Pawn Shop is not just a store, it becomes a living museum, where each item is recreated with historical depth and emotion. It was this same spirit that caught the attention of a television producer in the early 2000s. At first, Rick rejected the idea of a reality show. He didn't believe that bargaining over antique clocks, Japanese swords, or 19th century letters could attract audiences. But after a pilot, Pawn Stars officially aired on the History Channel in 2009, and in just a short time, Rick, who used to be a boy who loved reading in the dark, became a familiar name in every American family. Unlike most reality shows at that time, Pawn Stars did not follow a script or fake conflicts. It touched the hearts of the audience with sincerity by telling emotional stories through each item. Rick, along with his father, affectionately called Old Man, son Corey, and best friend Chumley, created a friendly, trustworthy, and close group. Rick is not only the host, but also the soul of the show. He analyzes each item with profound knowledge, but still maintains a rustic style, making the audience feel like they are also learning something new with him. Pawn Stars not only brought Rick to new heights, but also contributed to changing the public's view of the pawn industry, a field that was once misunderstood as lacking transparency. Now, pawn shops are seen as a repository of history, a place where personal memories can come back to life and be cherished. Rick was not only commercially successful, but also contributed to creating a special cultural mark, becoming a symbol of the spirit of learning, of perseverance to overcome difficulties to rise up. However, success also brought many challenges. Rick gradually had to face mixed opinions. Some people thought he manipulated customers. Others doubted the authenticity of the show. Some items were questioned about their origin. In response to criticism, Rick chose to respond calmly. "I never considered myself an expert. I am just a person who always learns every day." The milestone that made Rick stop was the passing of Old Man in 2018. Not only did he lose his father, he also lost his teacher, his companion in the journey to build gold and silver. However, Rick did not stop. He continued to operate the pawn shop in the old spirit, but at the same time adapted to the new era. He attended seminars, expanded his business, and sometimes spoke out about social issues. But no matter where he was, no matter what position he was in, he always kept the image of a man standing behind the cashier counter, the place where it all started. Rick Harrison is a model of resilience. From a boy with a chronic illness, dropped out of school early and grew up amidst countless obstacles, he turned those difficulties into motivation to rise up. His life is proof that no path is set in stone. It must be forged with determination, passion, and integrity. And while there may be many more twists and turns to come, Rick's journey will be remembered as one of the most remarkable stories of overcoming adversity in modern America. The stories that customers shared with Rick Harrison between price negotiations became the soul of Pawn Stars. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, when most people still viewed pawn shops as temporary places, Rick saw another possibility. The idea of a reality TV show gradually took shape in his mind, not about celebrities or lavish lifestyles, but about a real space where real people with their pasts, hopes, and losses were reflected in each seemingly inanimate item. Friends laughed at the idea. Producers shook their heads. "Who wants to see people pawn stuff on TV?" was the common reaction at the time. But Rick refused to give up. He believes there's something very real and very human going on in his shop. Not the flashy Hollywood stuff, but the quiet, profound stuff of everyday life. A woman brings in her wedding ring after a divorce. An old man sells his father's medal to pay his medical bills. A young boy shows up with a guitar that once belonged to a forgotten music legend. Every item, whether made of metal, wood, or precious stones, has a story, and Rick believes those stories are worth telling. He was right. In 2009, after years of development, Pawn Stars premiered on the History Channel. The concept was simple. Follow Rick, his strict father, Old Man, his son Corey, and his best friend Chumley as they appraise, negotiate, and discover the value behind each item. But it's the show's sincerity, simplicity, and rawness that makes it so compelling. From the first season, Pawn Stars created a fever. By the second season, the show broke viewership records, becoming one of the most popular shows on the History Channel. Rick Harrison, from a humble pawn shop owner, quickly became a familiar name across America. Even though he stepped into the media spotlight, Rick remained the same. He was still the man in the familiar polo shirt, walking up to the counter to shake hands with each customer, chatting and negotiating as if it was the first day he opened the shop. Viewers from all over flocked to Las Vegas, not only to try their luck in the casino, but also to witness the place that had appeared on television and to meet the man who changed the world's view of the pawn profession. Rick did not seek fame. He simply lived up to his values, cherishing the item, and more deeply, cherishing the person behind it. Over time, Gold and Silver Pawn Shop was no longer just a second-hand trading store. It became a symbol, a place to keep memories, a place where the past could be recreated, told, and heard. Rick was more than just a businessman. He was a keeper of stories. With a vision for the future, Rick expanded his business, invested in real estate, opened restaurants, and developed many other projects. For many, he was the living image of a dream, from a boy who dropped out of school, who was once looked down upon, to now building his own empire. But where there is light, there is also darkness. As Rick's reputation spread, along with the love, skepticism began to appear. Some in the industry thought Rick was using his influence to control the market. Some longtime experts commented that the show simplified a job that required experience and deep knowledge. Some even said that Rick was turning other people's difficulties into television content. Rick repeatedly asserted that all transactions at the store were conducted transparently, based on consensus and mutual respect. However, the rumors continued to spread. By around 2015, the wave of skepticism was no longer easy to ignore. From a quiet person behind the counter, Rick had now become a public figure. He appeared on major programs, spoke at conferences, and was invited to share his business experiences with young people. But along with that came fatigue. Many people sought him out for his reputation, to cooperate, invest, or simply seek benefits. Lawsuits also gradually appeared, at first just small commercial disputes, then personal accusations. Most were resolved or dismissed, but each lawsuit was like a scratch that was difficult to heal on a journey that seemed impossible to overcome. However, Rick continued, he still appeared on television, still talked about each item with a passion that never faded. Until one day, when the smoldering storm began to rise, not from a scandal, but from a seemingly harmless whisper uttered by an unexpected person. Under the never-ending lights of Las Vegas, the city of dreams and gambling, Rick Harrison has become far more than just a pawnbroker. By 2010, he was no longer just a man behind the counter, but a familiar face on screens everywhere, from small European eateries to modern Asian apartments. With his shaved head, experienced eyes, and half-smile, Rick has a very unique charm, a charm that comes not from the halo, but from a sincere curiosity for each item and the story behind it. Pawn Stars, although nominally a reality TV show, carries the breath of a cultural phenomenon. It is a place where old objects become gateways to slices of history, a stage that is not ostentatious, but wide enough for people's memories, losses, and hopes to come alive. Rick is at the center of it all. Whether he's confronted with an antique Japanese sword or a fake Rolex, he maintains an unflappable calm, a demeanor that makes viewers feel like they're listening to an old friend tell a story, rather than watching a TV show. Each episode is a journey through time. It might start with a tarnished Roman coin, a rusty musket, or a rare record signed by a famous artist. But most importantly, it's always the people who carry the item. The story they tell, whether it's a few shaky words or a lasting memory, is what keeps viewers engaged. Rick understands this and treats every person who walks into the store as if they're carrying a piece of history. Rick's family is surrounded by people who are familiar with him, with little need for scripted dialogue. His son Corey represents the new generation with his energetic recklessness. Chumley, clumsy but sincere, brings a gentle laugh. And the old man, the stern father, is a symbol of toughness, of old principles that never go out of style. They don't try to please others, nor do they act. And that's what makes them relatable. In just its first 2 seasons, Pawn Stars has climbed to the top of the History Channel's ratings. It's more than just a show, it's a brand. T-shirts, mugs, figurines, anything with Rick's face on it sells out. Tourists flock to Las Vegas not just to try their luck, but to line up early in the morning, hoping to meet the man who turned a pawn shop into a cultural destination. The gold and silver pawn shop grew rapidly. Rick expanded the store, hired more staff, and installed a security system to control the huge crowds. The store now serves not only as a place to make transactions, but also as a place for charity auctions, special events, and even marriage proposals. From a family business, it has grown into a bright spot in the heart of America's most vibrant city. Rick, who was once considered a junk guy, now appears at major events, speaking about economics, investing, and even popular culture. He opened restaurants, bars, and invested in real estate. In 2012, a political speech by Rick caused a stir. Some people praised his courage when he publicly expressed his political views. Others thought he was losing his original nature, the quiet shopkeeper who was passionate about every piece of old furniture. In a later interview, Rick said, "Fame is like a strange currency. It can open doors you never knew existed, but it also comes with a price that not everyone is willing to pay." And he was right. Those prices did not come loudly, did not take the form of scandal, but quietly like water dripping on stone. But over time, it is enough to leave cracks that are difficult to heal. As Pawn Stars exploded into a pop culture phenomenon, Rick Harrison's life took a different turn. He went from being a small pawnbroker in Las Vegas to a household name all over the world, from the backstreets of Texas to the skyscrapers of Tokyo. The man with the sharp eyes and signature smile became more than just a TV show. He became an icon. By 2015, Rick's net worth was estimated to be over $20 million. His income came not only from his TV show, but also from endorsements, product licensing, public appearances, and behind-the-scenes partnerships. Rick Harrison was no longer just an antique dealer. He was running a business that extended far beyond his pawn shop. But with such rapid growth, things got out of hand. Accounting processes became more complex. Legal procedures piled up. Items were no longer simply a matter of buying and selling, but a web of inspections, legal procedures, and contracts. Rick, accustomed to keeping track of every detail, began to hand over some of his control to financial and legal experts. It was a necessary step, but it also marked the beginning of a shift away from what had once made the store's soul. From there, the first signs of cracks began to appear, not loudly but quietly. In 2016, a former employee filed a lawsuit after being fired, claiming he had been treated unfairly. The case was settled out of court, but it made headlines. 2 years later, a customer came forward claiming that the store had purchased a lost Civil War item, an allegation that quickly went viral on social media, sparking controversy. Despite Rick's transparency in the sale process, public trust began to waver. On the outside, Rick still appeared calm and composed, but to those close to him, they saw a change. Rick returned to spreadsheets and paperwork, staying up all night to review seemingly endless reports. Like a captain returning to his cabin, he struggled to steer a ship that was too big and no longer as easy to control. In 2018, Rick's father, Richard Harrison, passed away. The quiet man who had built everything with Rick and who was the soul of Pawn Stars was no more. The loss caused Rick to withdraw from public events and reduce his media presence. He spent more time with his family and his shop, and he began making bold decisions, selling some assets, partnering with high-end antiques appraisers, and investing in a fund that specialized in rare artifacts. At first, those moves seemed smart, but they attracted attention from unexpected quarters. While new episodes of Pawn Stars continued to air, and Rick continued to appear on talk shows, in promotions, and at conferences, behind the scenes, a different picture was emerging. Rick became more private, more reserved, and according to a longtime friend, always on the lookout for something that no one else knew about. According to documents that were later released, several federal agencies began closely monitoring Rick's financial activities starting in early 2019. Some of the transfers were hard to explain, a few small discrepancies in the sales report. Small, seemingly insignificant pieces of the puzzle, but when put together, they form a larger, more questionable picture. Rick doesn't know it. On television, he's still the witty, history-savvy guy who brings each item to life. But somewhere behind the spotlight, a completely different journey is underway, quietly, persistently, and with determination. A journey that not everyone is ready to face. On a quiet Tuesday morning in early 2019, an anonymous email quietly drifted into a secure line. No catchy subject line, no big words, just one line. Undeclared cash sales, gold and silver pawn shop. No one knew who sent it. No address, no signature, no trace to follow. But sometimes it's the anonymous whispers that start the undercurrents. At first, it was just one of hundreds of anonymous complaints, perhaps from a disgruntled former employee, an unhappy customer, or simply an outsider looking to stir up trouble. But by law, any information had to be vetted. And it was during that seemingly routine check that something unusual began to emerge. The store's financial statements seemed too neat, so neat that it gave people pause. With millions of visitors flocking to Las Vegas each year and Pawn Stars' global reach, the reported numbers seemed puzzlingly modest. A team of investigators was quietly assembled. They began cross-referencing the revenue figures with tourism data, estimates from the show's production team, and even store traffic recorded by city cameras. From the fragments, a significant financial gap began to form. The investigation expanded. Tax records were reviewed line by line. Gradually, large sums of money began to emerge, transferred to unincorporated accounts, scattered across multiple states, in the names of entities with little real activity. Some of them had been named in documents about money laundering and the sale of unidentified antiquities. At this point, the case was no longer a simple administrative error. It seemed to have long since crossed that line. In early 2020, the Nevada Department of Revenue officially turned the case over to the federal level. The IRS Financial Investigations Team immediately got involved. Soon after, the Justice Department, the FBI, and Homeland Security units joined in. And at the center of it all, Rick Harrison. The man who had once symbolized the fusion of traditional business and modern television was now under scrutiny, while he himself seemed unaware of what was going on behind the scenes. Old episodes of Pawn Stars were rewatched. Investigators scrutinized every detail, from appraisals, purchase documents, to the journey of each item that had been aired. In one episode, an ancient Mesopotamian stone tablet was valued at tens of thousands of dollars. But after it aired, there was no trace in the books, nor any invoices or shipping documents. It was the perfect combination of reputation, opportunity, and a long-term vacuum of control, one investigator said. But the biggest question was, did Rick know? He was known for being careful and meticulous. One person said that reputation was as important as the most valuable antiques in the store. How could such a system have operated so smoothly for so many years without the nod from the person in charge? By mid-2020, more than a dozen unusual transactions had been flagged. From cash payments without documentation, to goods missing from the system, to customers on the watch list of the investigating agency. Each individual detail could have been a coincidence, but when put together, the picture became different. The investigation is still ongoing. Everything is just a puzzle waiting to be connected until an unexpected character steps out of the shadows, bringing with him a story that could change the entire situation. Her name was Angela Barrett, a former accountant who had spent nearly 3 years at the parent company behind Gold and Silver Pawn. But Angela was not the type to go quietly. She brought with her not just memories or rumors, but also concrete evidence, internal emails, financial spreadsheets, and especially a recording of a meeting in which Rick Harrison reportedly spoke frankly about taking some sales off the books. At a secure location in Las Vegas, Angela met privately with federal agents for 2 consecutive days. Each detail she presented was like a blueprint, a parallel system where high-value items were bought and sold without leaving an official trace. No receipts, no barcodes, no cameras. The back rooms of the store, described as gray areas in the system, were where all the sensitive transactions took place. What's remarkable is that Angela's revelations matched the details the federal investigation team had gathered earlier. Her testimony was the key piece that turned a financial review into a formal investigation into serious acts such as tax evasion, money laundering, and illicit antiquities trafficking. In December 2020, agents applied for a search warrant for Rick Harrison's personal and business bank accounts. What they found was beyond their expectations. Millions of dollars had been transferred to offshore accounts, including Cyprus, Belize, and the Cayman Islands. Some were disguised as donations to arts organizations, while the rest were routed through consulting firms that had no real operations, existing only on paper. The investigation quickly expanded. Subpoenas were sent to vendors, appraisers, shipping companies, and even people who had appeared on the show to sell the items. A tangled web began to emerge, not yet complete but beginning to form. Rick Harrison at the time seemed oblivious. The store was open. The show was still filming. Everything was business as usual, until one day in April 2021. A confidential informant, posing as a wealthy collector, approached the store with an extremely rare antique. The item had been reported missing from a European collection, and now it had unexpectedly turned up in Las Vegas. Rick personally appraised the item and bought it for cash, no questions asked. The transaction was fully recorded on hidden video and audio, and as he inspected the item, Rick half joked, "You wouldn't find this in a museum, would you?" A seemingly innocuous statement, but to the agents it was the most compelling evidence they had ever seen. Now they had not only statements, documents, cash flow, but also images, audio, and a wanted item. That was enough to take the next step. In July 2021, a sealed indictment was filed. Rick Harrison was identified as the prime suspect in a massive money laundering scheme. The indictment accused him of facilitating, profiting from illegal antiquities transactions, and using shell companies to avoid paying taxes on the huge profits. On July 22nd, federal agents working with SWAT raided the gold and silver pawn shop. The incident occurred in broad daylight, right in the middle of a crowd of tourists. Images of employees being led out of the store in handcuffs were broadcast on television. Rick was arrested without a fight. According to one source, he asked only one question as he was being escorted away. Who did this? At the federal detention center, Rick Harrison was formally charged with 7 counts, including tax evasion, money laundering, and trafficking in antiquities. He was released on $2 million bail, secured by personal assets and third-party pledges. The consequences were immediate. TV networks stopped broadcasting Pawn Stars. Sponsors dropped out en masse. History Channel issued a brief statement, confirming that they were ending their partnership pending the conclusion of the investigation. Social media was abuzz. Some viewers still had faith in Rick. Others felt betrayed, disappointed with the image of the host they once admired. Meanwhile, Rick kept absolutely silent on the advice of his legal team. But behind the scenes, he began preparing for the biggest fight of his life. Rick hired top lawyers, forensic accountants, and a crisis communications team. He vowed to clear his name. However, the damage to his reputation was irreversible. In the public eye, the image of a friendly, approachable businessman on television was gradually giving way to a big question. Rick Harrison, just a victim caught up in a larger conspiracy, or really the mastermind behind a sophisticated system that few could imagine? The morning after the raid, America woke up to a reality no one had ever imagined. Rick Harrison, the familiar face, the man with the half-smile and piercing eyes on Pawn Stars, was now all over the news, not as a TV star, but as the focus of a massive federal investigation. Headlines came in like a constant knock on the door of fame. The pawn shop tycoon and the million-dollar money laundering suspicion. Rick Harrison, from TV icon to the law, the unthinkable fall of an American media icon. On social media, hashtags like #HashPawnGate and #HashPawnScandal quickly trended. People no longer talked about ancient coins or Japanese swords. All eyes were now on one question. What really happened behind the doors of Las Vegas's most famous pawn shop? Rick's personal life was dissected. Relationships, behind-the-scenes dealings, old statements rehashed sentence by sentence. The paparazzi were stationed outside his home day and night. A drone clip showing gold and silver pawn deserted after the raid quickly went viral as a symbol of its silent downfall. People who worked with Rick, who had interacted with him, appeared on podcasts, talk shows, and social media platforms to recount what they always suspected. One defended him. He was always nice. He would never do anything wrong. But another voice said, anyone who worked there knows that things are not always clear. The media treated the incident like a current affairs detective story. Some channels invited legal experts to analyze how money is laundered through pawnbroking. Another invited a lawyer to predict the outcome if Rick cooperated with the investigation. The views vary, but it's all speculation. Because Rick hasn't said anything. No press conferences, no statements, no posts. The silence has only fueled public curiosity. Is he negotiating a deal? Or is there something more complicated going on? Pawn Stars, once a part of pop culture, is now caught in an unprecedented vortex. The network has suspended its programming indefinitely. Media partners have pulled out en masse. Neutral statements like cooperating with authorities and respecting the legal process have failed to calm public opinion. Branded merchandise has been pulled from shelves. Ad contracts have been put on hold. The financial numbers that once defined Rick's success have begun to decline. But if the media is the fire, the internet is the storm. On Reddit, users revisit old episodes, analyzing every glance, every word. Some say the signs have always been there. It's just that no one has noticed. On YouTube, behind-the-scenes analysis videos of Pawn Stars have quickly racked up millions of views. On TikTok, parodies of the familiar phrase "I'll call a friend" have gone viral with satirical overtones. Mock courtroom scenes, legal analysis from regular users all add up to a picture of reality mixed with media drama. Rick is no longer just a host. He's become a symbol of a larger story, the rise and fall of the American dream. He rose from a small shop in the Nevada desert to a national figure, and now faces the prospect of losing it all with an indictment. But amid all the noise, something has quietly taken shape. A wave of unobtrusive support. No protests, no posters, just simple comments. "I still believe in him." Gentle messages. Rick is not that type of guy, because to them, Rick Harrison is still the guy who looked at an item and said, "I'll call a friend." And now, they just hope someone will call him back. Just days after the nation was stunned by the federal indictment of Rick Harrison, a wave of backlash erupted. On Change.org, a petition titled "Justice for Rick Harrison" quickly attracted more than 500,000 signatures in its first week. For many, this was more than just a case. It was a clash between justice and public opinion, between personal beliefs and the apparatus of power. In Las Vegas, Gold and Silver Pawn, once a destination for millions of Pawn Stars fans, has become a different kind of symbol. No longer a tourist attraction, but a sea of handwritten signs, small flags, and shirts bearing Rick's face and the words "Justice for Rick." People stood there, not just to show their support, but as if to protect a part of a memory they once believed in. The incident continued to shock as some civic organizations questioned the transparency of the investigation. A few independent journalists began digging into the case and discovered suspicious details. Some of the items that were supposed to be evidence had actually been purchased years earlier, with proper documentation. Even the main whistleblower, a former employee, was suspected of having inconsistent testimony and personal motives that were unclear. The picture of the case that seemed clear now became more complicated. Rick Harrison was not just a defendant in court, but also became the center of a widespread debate about fairness, about the power of the media, and about how society treats those who were once honored. Meanwhile, the reality was more cruel than ever. Gold and Silver Pawn, once Rick's pride, was now deserted like never before. Customer numbers plummeted, tours canceled stops, and mixed reviews appeared online, causing decades of accumulated reputation to suddenly falter. Rick's family was not immune to the pressure. His son, who had accompanied his father on television, tried to reassure the public, but was caught up in the storm of public opinion. Some longtime partners began to distance themselves, worried that any connection now might become a media liability. Every aspect of Rick's personal life was brought to light. From financial records, past relationships, to old political contributions, all were analyzed and dissected. A traffic ticket from a decade ago did not escape the scrutiny. A photo of Rick eating alone went viral online, becoming a symbol of the cold isolation of a man who had been at the height of his fame. The big question began to be asked: why Rick, and why now? Some people thought that Rick had trusted too much in the safety of the television spotlight. Some believe that his outspoken statements have made certain forces uncomfortable. Others believe that Rick has, unintentionally or not, touched on something more sensitive than anyone thought. Whatever the answer, Rick Harrison's image has now transcended the realm of a reality show. He is a symbol of a great lesson, that in the age of intertwined media and social media, a person can be built over decades, but can also be destroyed with just a few news stories. Amid all that noise, Rick has remained silent. No announcements, no interviews, no status updates, just a thoughtful silence, making everyone wonder, was he waiting for the right moment? Because sometimes a well-timed statement can change the whole situation. The downtown Las Vegas courthouse has seen its fair share of high-profile cases, but never one like the one that opened on the day Rick Harrison's trial began. The feeling that hung over the courthouse was not one of curiosity, but of the invisible pressure of millions of eyes watching from across the country. This was no ordinary criminal case, but the unofficial replay of a pop culture phenomenon that had been ingrained in the minds of television viewers for more than a decade. Rick Harrison entered the courtroom with a heavy burden on his shoulders, not just because of the charges, but because of the values and stories he had represented over the years. From a small pawn shop in Las Vegas, he had built a global brand, an image synonymous with hard work and a belief in opportunity. Now the man once loved for his wit and candor faced serious charges: money laundering, tax evasion, and dealing in antiques of dubious provenance. The trial became a tense affair, where every piece of evidence and testimony could tip the scales. Jury selection lasted 5 days, a rarity because of the sheer number of people who knew Rick from television. More than 400 individuals were called, but most were disqualified because of preconceived notions. In the end, 12 jurors and 4 alternates were selected, with the expectation of impartiality amid the rising tide of public opinion. The prosecution made a strong case from the start. Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Greer, known for her sharp style, insisted that this was no random business mistake. She accused Rick of being at the center of a sophisticated money laundering scheme that used his TV fame as a smokescreen to hide millions of dollars in undeclared income. Shell companies, offshore bank accounts, and undocumented dealings were detailed as a picture was laid out over years. The courtroom fell silent as a previously unaired video was played, in which Rick appeared to joke about skipping legal proceedings over a 14th century manuscript. For many viewers, the moment was a crack in his long-honored image. The defense, however, was in no rush to rebut. Attorney Marcus Bell, known for his calm and nuanced approach, chose to let the allegations speak for themselves. He highlighted the complex landscape of the antiques and pawnbroking business, where legal requirements often don't keep up with the realities of the business. The suspected actions, he said, did not necessarily indicate criminal intent, but rather were the result of a flawed legal environment. The first week of the trial was overwhelmingly in favor of the prosecution. They repeatedly presented financial documents, statements, and testimony from accountants and tax investigators. Numerous emails were released, recording conversations between Rick and experts about the dubious origins of some of the artifacts. Familiar segments from the TV show were also used as evidence, making a strong emotional impression on the jury. Rick remained silent for most of the trial, rarely showing emotion. As the prosecution tried to dismantle the image of a famous TV host, the defense team quietly prepared a long-term strategy, not only to rebut the evidence, but also to clarify the entire context that led to the accusations. Gradually, the trial became not only a place to judge individual behavior, but also a confrontation between media images and legal reality, between what the public once believed to be the truth and the details gradually peeled away under the light of justice. The focus of the trial shifted sharply when Angela Barrett, a former accountant at Rick Harrison's system, took the stand as a witness. During nearly 4 hours of testimony on Friday, she recounted in detail her time at the company, secret internal meetings, and vague instructions that she said were related to the accounting adjustments. Barrett said she had raised concerns about the financial irregularities, but was met with indifference and coldness from management. A silence, she said, stemmed from a belief that reputation was a guarantee of immunity from legal action. While Barrett's testimony was considered powerful, the defense did not let that sway their case. They were quick to question Barrett's true motives for giving the testimony. Some of the points raised included the fact that she had signed a confidentiality agreement but violated it, as well as another lawsuit against her former employer. These factors were presented to raise questions about whether Barrett was acting out of personal motives rather than justice. In addition, the defense team also argued that what Barrett shared was subjective, lacking specific evidence to prove that Rick Harrison had directly directed any illegal acts. Next, the court summoned an expert in the field of antiquities and cultural heritage, who confirmed that some artifacts related to Rick had appeared on global watch lists, including items missing from museums or private collections. According to the expert, the international antiquities market is often opaque, and there are many obstacles to verifying provenance. This further raises questions about the legality of Rick's business. However, the defense team immediately countered with documents proving that most of the artifacts were purchased through legal channels such as public auction houses or registered dealers. They brought in another antiquities expert who asserted that the ambiguity in the information about the origin is common and it cannot be used as criminal evidence without clear elements of fraud. According to them, any conclusion must be based on strict authentication rather than inference from unclear points. A remarkable turning point occurred when Rick Harrison himself stepped up to the witness stand. The whole courtroom was silent. Under the watchful eyes of the public and the media, Rick shared about his life, from his poor childhood, illness, dropping out of school, to his journey with his father to build the famous pawn shop Gold and Silver Pawn. He emphasized that success comes from relentless effort, not tricks. In court, Rick completely denied the charges of money laundering, tax evasion, and being involved in the illegal possession of artifacts. He argued that if there were any errors, they were the result of a lack of control or a misunderstanding of the process, not intentional behavior. Rick said he had no direct role in the financial management, and many of the names of the legal entities named in the lawsuit were completely unknown to him until the lawsuit began. Regarding the disputed artifacts, he affirmed that he was always ready to cooperate and hand them over if there was a basis to believe that they were of unknown origin. The purchase, he said, was based on trust in reputable intermediaries. The prosecution continued to press by presenting video clips from the TV show and internal emails, trying to prove negligence in management. However, Rick stood firm, emphasizing the difference between the entertainment of television and the legal compliance process in real business. Rick's testimony lasted nearly a day and presented a different picture, not of a TV star accused of fraud, but of a real, flawed, vulnerable person who may have been caught up in a system beyond his control. As the trial entered its final stages, the prosecution urged the jury to focus on the systemic signs of behavior, arguing that this was a sophisticated pattern of lawlessness designed to generate illegal profits, with Rick Harrison at the center. The defense, by contrast, ended with a powerful argument that this was an overreaching attempt to turn a man who had risen from poverty into a symbol of retribution. The charges, they argued, while serious, were not supported by overwhelming evidence. After 2 days of deliberations, the jury returned to the courtroom to an unusually heavy atmosphere. Every seat was filled. The media crowded around the cameras. Old acquaintances sat quietly in the back, even former competitors in the industry now silently watching. In the crowd there was not a whisper, not a sound. Only eyes were fixed on one man, Rick Harrison. He sat there, calm, his arms folded across his chest, his gaze unwavering. In front of him was a half-finished glass of water and a stack of notes on which no one knew what he had written. Everything seemed to stand still, only waiting. The 4 members of the jury stood. The woman representing the jury spoke in a deep voice, carrying the weight of each word. Guilty. Conspiracy to evade taxes, money laundering, possession of cultural artifacts of unknown legal origin. Each charge rang out like a hammer blow in the silence of the room. No one cried, no one screamed, just a collective, heavy breath. Rick closed his eyes, then opened them. A slow nod, as if he had known this would happen. The judge called for immediate sentencing, and then The moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. Rick Harrison was asked, as was customary, if he had anything to say. He stood up, not to the judge, not to his attorneys, but to the audience, to the press, the cameras, and the people who had grown up watching him on the small screen. And instead of a plea, Rick began to speak, not loudly, not shakily, just in a low, steady voice. Each word seemed to split a curtain between law and reality, between sin and humanity. He didn't defend himself. He didn't deny. He didn't paint himself as a victim. Instead, he spoke about a system that he felt had built a narrative with him as the bad guy. A man who dropped out of school due to illness, who started from a small pawn shop, who worked tirelessly to get ahead without any backing. And now, he has become a symbol of judgment, not just because of the evidence, but because he does not fit the stereotype that society wants to believe. He ended with a short affirmation that he knows who he is and what really matters. Soon after, the sentence was announced: life in prison. Less than an hour later, the speech was all over social media. From major platforms like Twitter, TikTok, to YouTube and forums, Rick's public image became the main topic. His words were shared, put to music, reenacted from many perspectives, and spread like wildfire. His hashtag climbed to the top of global trends. Legal experts began to debate the impact of the speech on the appeals process. Some activists saw it as a wake-up call. Those who worked with him, former co-stars and colleagues in the industry, most spoke out not to discuss the legality, but to talk about the man, a man who did not bow, did not keep quiet, did not fear. That night, Rick Harrison was transferred to a high-security federal prison. On both sides of the road, people stood silently with signs in hand. Some shouted, others silently threw gold coins into the road as a symbol of value, of anger, of something quietly moving beneath the surface of the water. Public opinion was divided. Some believed he was the victim of a pre-planned prosecution. Others thought he knew how to create emotion to cover up the truth. But regardless of their differences, one thing was undeniable. Rick Harrison left a mark. He was more than just a defendant. He became a symbol for a generation questioning justice, power, and how society treats the truth. As the judge announced Rick Harrison's sentence, the air in the courtroom seemed to freeze. The words, life imprisonment, fell, heavy as a rock, leaving no room for hope. No parole, no conditions, no suspension, no way back. Rick did not react immediately. He sat motionless, as if his entire body were listening to every sound echoing in the cold room. His face was expressionless, no anger, no fear, just a deep gaze, and his hands rested on the table. The team of lawyers behind him looked at each other in silence. Despite having planned for every possibility, the moment of truth was strangely cold and hard to swallow. The judge continued his sentence in a steady but firm tone. He listed the evidence, emphasized the absolute unanimity of the jury, and affirmed the seriousness of the alleged acts. He acknowledged the cultural impact of Rick's show, but then closed with a chilling statement: no celebrity exempts a man from the law. The final blow slammed shut. Rick was arrested on the spot. No goodbyes, no farewell hugs. 2 federal agents approached, silently and procedurally. Rick stood up, nodded, and walked away in silence. The cameras captured the moment his hands were cuffed. No fuss, no resistance, just a man in a gray shirt amid a sea of flashbulbs and unanswered questions. The scene quickly became iconic, setting off a wave of protests. Outside the courthouse at first, only a few dozen people held signs. But within hours, the crowd exploded. Hundreds, then thousands poured in. Not just fans, but people who had seen themselves in Rick's journey from nothing. People who had been overlooked, who had fallen, but who still stood up. They chanted, "Justice for Rick," a simple yet angry slogan. The movement spread quickly. From Las Vegas to Chicago, from Nashville to Los Angeles, life-size prints of Rick were placed in front of government buildings. Old pawn tickets were held up as a symbol of protest. The phrase, "Don't tax the truth," appeared everywhere, from street slogans to the titles of viral videos. Social media exploded. In less than 2 days, tens of millions of posts related to the case flooded Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. People analyzed every detail of the trial, pointed out irregularities, and questioned the true motives behind the verdict. The hashtag #HashConPottenJustice became a focal point, a counter-accusation of the justice system. Rick's legal team quickly filed an appeal. They argued that the evidence was weak, some witnesses were unreliable, and the sentence was too harsh for the facts of the case. This was a serious error wrapped in a veneer of fairness, the lead attorney asserted. Rick was transferred to the Victorville Federal Correctional Institution, a medium-security prison in California. No privileges, no private rooms, no celebrity treatment. When he arrived, he had only the clothes he wore from the trial. A photo was taken of him entering the facility, a tired but unyielding face staring straight into the camera. The photo quickly went viral. Inside the facility, Rick didn't ask for anything different. He followed the rules, worked at the library, and occasionally called home. The only son he kept in regular contact with was Corey. Rick spent most of his time reading, writing, and observing quietly, as if he were preparing for something, or simply getting used to a new world where everything had changed. To many inmates, Rick was no longer a TV star. He was a symbol of someone who stood up when pushed down, who spoke up when others were silent. Outside, public opinion continued to heat up. The TV channel that had aired the show Pawn Stars announced that it would stop all production and broadcasting. A show that had lasted more than a decade and that had defined American reality television was officially over. Revenues plummeted. Online stores quietly removed all Rick-related products. His name, from a brand icon, was now the center of a heated debate. Tourists stopped flocking to Las Vegas. What had once been a bustling place was now barren. Grass grew on the sidewalks, dusty display cases were locked, controversy spread. On television, legal experts debated the appropriateness of the sentence. Some argued that life for financial crimes was excessive. Others argued that Rick's reputation had been a shield from the law, and now justice had finally come. One federal prosecutor even declared on air, "Considering the value of the missing artifacts, this sentence is too lenient." Rick didn't respond. He didn't talk to the press. He didn't give any interviews. But his image and words were everywhere, on T-shirts, on tattoos, on graffiti. Artists from New York to London painted portraits of him, both colorful and lonely. Students chose Rick as their subject for their essays. A documentary team began work on Pawn: The Rise and Fall of Rick Harrison, with the goal of collecting testimonies from everyone who had ever been by his side. Rick remained silent. Maybe he was waiting, and the world kept turning, but not the same. After Rick Harrison was sentenced, the air was strangely quiet in some places, while in others it erupted with unquenchable cheers. At Gold and Silver Pawn, once a must-see for visitors to Las Vegas, everything seemed to stand still. The lines of people who once waited for photos, autographs, or the hope of getting on a show were gone. The doors were still open, the lights were still on, but the soul of the place, the man who could turn an old item into a living history, was gone. Customers still stopped by, partly out of curiosity, partly out of habit. But what had once made the place alive was gone. There was no more witty banter behind the counter, no more lively haggling, no more warmth that had made the pawn shop iconic. The souvenirs that hung on the walls, photos with stars, special memorabilia that Rick had once kept, were now either dusty or taken down. Gold and Silver Pawn was no longer a symbol of a difficult journey, but a relic of a shattered dream. Rick's son, Corey Harrison, who had grown up surrounded by shelves and cameras, had become the reluctant face of a faltering legacy. He had gone from a floor-sweeping boy learning to negotiate to his father's sidekick in running the store. Now he was thrust into a role he had never prepared for, holding together what was left in the midst of a crisis. In the early days, Corey kept quiet. He canceled appearances, refused to speak to the press, and made no public statements. But the pressure was mounting. Rumors began to spread that Corey might close the store or even be involved in a crime. His name was plastered across social media platforms, accompanied by a flood of commentary and theories. In the face of that backlash, Corey was forced to speak out. He posted a 10-minute video, filmed in a small office behind the store. In the video, Corey looks directly into the camera and says, "My dad is innocent. I don't need a verdict to believe that. I've lived with him all my life. I know what kind of person he is. He was a builder, a teacher, a man who reached out to those who no one else would. Maybe he had misplaced his trust. Maybe he didn't control things the way he should have, but that doesn't make him a criminal." The video went viral. Public opinion was divided, but many felt a sense of awakening. Community pages that seemed on the verge of closing became gathering places for supporters. Small campaigns began to connect. The phrase, "Free Rick," once considered offensive, has been popping up on social media platforms, shared by celebrities, journalists, and even some politicians. In Las Vegas, thousands of people gathered outside the federal courthouse holding signs calling for Rick's freedom. A makeshift stage was set up, where people took turns speaking about the criminalization of entrepreneurship, about the inadequacies of the judiciary, and about the right to make mistakes without having their lives ruined. The event was streamed live on YouTube, attracting hundreds of thousands of views. The movement has spread beyond the country. In London, a mural of Rick's image suddenly appeared in Camden Town. In Brazil, fans lit candles in front of a replica of a store. In Japan, a group of university students held a discussion on the topic. Rick Harrison, inspirational or sinner of the system? Meanwhile, Rick was almost completely isolated from the outside world. There was no internet, no social media, no television. He was allowed only letters from his lawyers and a few visits. One day in mid-September, Corey visited his father. Through the thick glass, he said, "There are so many people out there for you, everywhere. They're not letting this go." Rick leaned back in his chair, sighed, and said, "Maybe. This isn't all for nothing after all." The movement continued to spread. Legal experts began to speak out. A petition calling for a new trial circulated, quickly gathering hundreds of thousands of signatures. Some suggested taking the case to Congress. A former federal judge shared on television, "In the hundreds of cases I've tried, I've never seen a sentence this severe for someone who had no criminal record, was not violent, and cooperated fully. This is an excessive sentence." Of course, not everyone agrees. Some critics point out that the evidence is clear, the witnesses are credible, and the financial implications are indisputable. They argue that Rick's sentence was entirely justified. "Justice is not measured by television fame," one former prosecutor commented. Still, most of the public wasn't looking for legal terms. They were looking for a more familiar concept of justice. For them, Rick was more than just a familiar face on television. He was a symbol of a simple dream, that if you tried and didn't give up, you could succeed. The sight of Rick handcuffed and removed from the spotlight was a blow to that belief. The movement grew. Fundraising campaigns were launched. A website called pawnjustice.org was created, chronicling the case, publishing court documents, legal analysis, and touching letters from fans, teachers, veterans, former addicts, single mothers, young entrepreneurs, all telling how Rick had inspired them. One of the most memorable moments came when a famous pop star wore a Free Rick hoodie to a sold-out concert. The photo quickly went viral, becoming iconic. Related hashtags surpassed 50 million shares. The movement was no longer a knee-jerk reaction, but a powerful affirmation that the system could be wrong and should be questioned when it hurt real people. In Las Vegas, the pawn shop began to catch its breath. Corey reopened the exhibit, with a new banner hanging above it, "Golden and Silver Legacy." Employees wore shirts that read, "Still Standing." Right at the entrance, under the familiar statue, was a small sign with a simple message, "For those who see value, even when others don't." Customers began to line up again, not as loudly as before, but steadily. Some carried homemade signs, some wore shirts with Rick's face on them. They came not just to buy, but to remember, and to keep the flame, as weak as it once was, never truly extinguished. Thanks for watching. If this story makes you think, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share to spread the message. See you in the next videos. Today, we will explore a story that has shocked many people. Rick Harrison, once known as a symbol of American humor, trustworthiness, and success, is now facing serious charges in federal court. From a TV star loved by millions of viewers, Rick suddenly appeared in handcuffs, prosecuted in connection with a series of shocking crimes, from money laundering, illegal detention, to participating in an organized crime ring that spanned the international scope. What makes the public wonder is, how could someone who was once considered a familiar face, close to the audience for many years, be involved in such cruel and dangerous acts? What lies behind the friendly facade and successful image? What hidden corners have been hidden for so long? Join us as we delve into this shocking case to find out the truth behind one of American television's most surprising falls. In the early morning of April 13, 2025, Las Vegas was still bright and bustling with casinos, lavish shows, and endless crowds. But inside the Clark County Courthouse, the atmosphere was the complete opposite: heavy, tense, and filled with suspense. Dozens of reporters, media cameras, and a curious crowd crowded in silence, waiting for a trial unlike any before. Rick Harrison, once a familiar face on American television, was brought to the dock. The man once praised for his intelligence, wit, and charisma now appeared with his head bowed, his hands cuffed, without a word of defense. The confident, decisive image once associated with him in the public's mind was now reduced to a dazed, exhausted look. In a packed courtroom, the judge began reading the nearly 200-page indictment, a litany of serious crimes that left the courtroom speechless. Human trafficking, false imprisonment, money laundering, organized abuse, and running a global criminal network. According to the prosecution, Rick was not just a player. He was the mastermind, the architect, and the operator of the entire system. The superficial activities of the adult entertainment stores and the financial transactions at the casinos were just a cover for a sophisticated network built to profit from human suffering. For nearly 5 years, the system had operated smoothly under Rick's direct supervision. The evidence came one by one: security cameras, handwritten documents, encrypted emails, and heartbreaking testimony from victims, all of which gradually painted a grim picture of a well-coordinated and cold-blooded organization. The more evidence was revealed, the harder it was for the public to accept the truth, that a former television icon could be behind such a ruthless organization. And then the fateful moment came, when the judge announced the verdict. A suffocating silence fell over the room. Rick Harrison was officially sentenced to death. No reaction, no tears, no pleas, only closed eyes as if he had predicted this day. A heartbreaking cry rang out from the audience. It was a mother who had lost her daughter in mystery for many years. The atmosphere was stifling, as if it contained all the resentment and anger that had been pent up for too long. Outside the court, the crowd held banners calling for justice, while international media outlets quickly reported the news. CNN, BBC, Reuters all updated every detail of this shocking event. In less than a day, the hashtag #RickHarrison death penalty has attracted millions of social media discussions, spreading across the globe. From a beloved television icon, Rick Harrison is now at the center of one of the most shocking cases in the history of the entertainment industry. A story that makes the whole world look back at the dark side of fame, where the halo can obscure the most terrifying truths. While some fans still cling to the belief that it was all a misunderstanding, anti-trafficking organizations are adamant. This is the beginning of a journey to expose a crime that has been going on in the shadows. What motivated prosecutors to pursue the harshest punishment was not just the sheer scale of the crime, but the sophistication and ruthlessness with which Rick Harrison designed and ran a years-long system of exploitation. Every transaction was encrypted, every victim was turned into an anonymous code, and any trace that could have given away the secret was erased. There was no room for chance. It was all calculated with cold, chilling precision. In the words of a senior FBI investigator, this wasn't a mistake. This was an empire perfectly disguised as a television show. The first trial was not simply a trial of an individual, but a key that opened the door to a series of dark events behind the lights of Las Vegas. Rick Harrison was just the face on the surface. Behind him was a sophisticated machine with hidden characters, people who never appeared on screen but who protected and maintained the existence of a fierce underground world. That empire was built not only with money, but with the pain and silence of hundreds of people who were turned into commodities. Rick Harrison, the man who inspired millions of Americans with his story of rising from nothing, was once the embodiment of the American dream. Starting out in a small shop run by his father, Rick impressed with his intelligence and sharp negotiating skills. The program Porn Stars not only brought him to millions of viewers, but also turned him into a pop culture phenomenon. Rick's witty haggling, rare antiques, and tough-talking voice have been etched into the public's memory for nearly 15 years on the air. But while the TV spotlight was shining brightly, a criminal network was quietly taking shape behind the scenes. It was no longer a world of antiques and rare paintings, but of cold discussions about human fate. By 2009, when the show went on air and viewership spiked, the small shop in a sleepy residential area had become a magnet for customers and revenue. Rick became a symbol of success, making media appearances, signing books, giving speeches, and becoming the face of the entire city of Las Vegas. But that fame provided the perfect mask for the horrors that lay behind it. Rick wasn't just running a business. He was hiding a criminal network that ran like a Swiss watch. From shell companies to anonymous accounts, everything is designed to legitimize the profits from exploiting people as commodities. And the truth is only the beginning. The secrets that lie beneath the cover may reveal more names, more parts of a giant machine that few could ever imagine could exist in the heart of America's most famous entertainment city. Investigative records reveal that between 2016 and 2022, Rick Harrison was behind or controlled at least 6 shell companies, all of which were opaque, with no websites, no visible offices, and no formal employees. Yet each company received money from mysterious partners in Serbia, the UAE, Thailand, and Romania through a complex, multi-layered, and difficult-to-trace money transfer network. The network only began to unravel when the FBI launched an undercover operation called Pale Porn in late 2021. The clue came from a shipping document bearing the name RH Acquisitions LLC, a document found in the files of a house where a trafficking victim had been held. The document, dated 1974, referred to the shipment of rare items, which at first glance sounded like antiques. But according to a survivor, the phrase was just code, a reference to the people themselves who were being trafficked like merchandise. From there, the FBI began to track down each link. They combed through thousands of financial records, tracked the money, planted people in the network, and inspected every gas station and every small exchange. The reconstruction revealed a meticulous system, with Rick's porn shop at the center. Not just a front, but a key transit point for a large-scale money laundering operation. A former FBI agent who had worked on human trafficking investigations along the Mexican border testified that what made Rick's network so dangerous was not just its size, but its elaborate legitimacy. Using his television fame, Rick turned shady deals into seemingly harmless ones. For example, an $83,000 shipping contract for a 19th century African mask, an item that never appeared in the store's inventory, was signed with an anonymous company in Liechtenstein with no real address. Rick also took full advantage of the Las Vegas environment, where a flexible financial infrastructure allowed for quick and unobserved cash transactions. In 1 month, he showed up at 5 different casinos and made more than 40 currency exchanges, withdrawing more than $350,000. a classic but extremely effective money laundering technique. During the trial, prosecutors presented a complex financial chart with Rick Harrison at the center. The arrows represented the flow of money. The squares were shell companies. The connectors were anonymous victims. No matter how many layers the money passed through, the final destination was the jewelry store right in the middle of Las Vegas Boulevard. The brutality of the system cannot be measured in the number of victims or the money. It lies in the coldness of the organization, where people are coded, classified, priced, and traded like commodities. According to a former technician who worked at the store, Rick came in at 3 a.m. one night with a group of strangers. They brought big wooden crates through the back door. When I asked what was inside, he just said, "Don't pry into things you shouldn't know about." The friendly, humorous image of Rick Harrison on television, the father figure, the sharp negotiator, is slowly being replaced by a colder portrait. The architect of a sophisticated system of exploitation where laughter is just a mask for the dark secrets behind. The truth doesn't come with a bang. It often begins with a whisper, a forgotten detail, an unnoticed trace. For the FBI, the case didn't start with a TV show or a pawn shop. It started with a missing persons file, that of a 16-year-old girl named Jenna Morales from Reno, Nevada. Jenna wasn't a high-profile case, at least not at first. She disappeared after signing up for an online modeling program that had been advertised on social media. From the website to the social media accounts, everything was professionally designed, from the photos to the fake partners to the alluring invitations. She was promised an all-expenses-paid photo shoot in Los Angeles. She got on the last bus out of Reno, and no one has heard from Jenna since. Most such cases are buried under thousands of files. But this one small detail opened up a maze, and for the first time, light began to shine into the dark corners of an unsuspecting world. But what shocked the agents even more was not the scale of the network, but the way Rick Harrison ran it all, with a cold, calculating quality. Rick didn't say much during the encrypted calls, but each word was carefully chosen, as if he were controlling everything remotely, not as a cog, but as the brain behind the entire machine. Suspicion quickly turned to certainty when one of the agents discovered that the phone used during these calls was the same one Rick had used publicly on television. As the investigation deepened, the agents discovered a secret archive, a meticulous record of every shipment, every destination, every coded name. Some of the records involved unofficial ports and shipping routes that didn't appear on conventional maps. This network, it turned out, was not only located in Las Vegas, but also spread to other countries, operating silently but effectively, both as a place to transfer money and to hide people who were considered as commodities. A veteran agent exclaimed, "This is no longer a normal criminal group. This is a machine, and Rick Harrison is the main operator of it. No detail is left out. Everything is calculated like a closed, tactical map." With the evidence piling up, the FBI launched many raids at related locations. The result was documents clearly printed with Rick's traces, from shipping contracts, coded notes, to seemingly innocuous receipts, all showing his deep role in organizing, coordinating, and concealing unforgivable acts. Many of the documents even listed the goods being shipped, which later turned out to be young girls ranging from teens to adults, with code names, prices, and detailed routes. From the recordings, to the transaction codes, to the discovered storage facilities, every detail painted a portrait of Rick Harrison that was completely different from the cheerful, approachable image the public once knew. No longer the comedic TV dad, Rick was now seen as the designer of a giant, sophisticated machine hiding in the shadows of celebrity and legitimate business. More than 60 cases of young girls disappearing across the United States, from Nevada to Florida, from Ohio to Texas, had all been linked to the activities of RH Acquisitions, LLC. The strange records, codes, and papers that were initially thought to be a system error now became a complete piece of a dark puzzle. And at the center of it all, none other than Rick Harrison, the man who turned the pain and disappearance of dozens of victims into part of his cold and ruthless operating model. While pretending to use archaic business language, language experts confirmed that the phrases appearing in the notes were in fact near-exact copies of the terminology commonly used in international human trafficking networks. From there, a dark picture emerged. A famous television entrepreneur once associated with the negotiation of antiques was quietly operating a complex system where people were transported like commodities. It all started with a name, Jenna Morales. She might have been forgotten forever if not for a misdirected invoice with the strange note, Item 1874. From that moment on, the question was no longer whether Rick was involved, but who else was behind it, how many victims were still unknown, and how the system had been able to operate so smoothly for 5 years without being detected. The most obvious answer, however, came not from interrogations or financial records. It was behind a soundproof wall in an old warehouse on East Sahara Avenue in Las Vegas. A black, leather-bound notebook, seemingly forgotten for years, was found in a narrow concrete compartment, hidden behind wood paneling and insulation. There was no lock, no storage box, just a thin layer of dust, as if it had always been waiting to be discovered. When the first page was turned, all doubts disappeared. Inside were handwritten notes in black and blue ink, detailing transactions not about antiques or art, but about people. Each person was described by a code number, age, gender, nationality, personality traits, and destination. No names, no pictures, just empty numbers, 6318. Each entry was a human life. 230 entries in total, representing at least 230 victims. But what was more haunting was not the number, but the way Rick wrote it. There was no hesitation, no emotion. The lines flowed smoothly, as neatly as in an accounting book, suggesting that this was no spur-of-the-moment action. It was systematic. It was planned. It was power expressed in every stroke. The notebook was not meant to be secretive. It was like a silent declaration that Rick Harrison had never feared being discovered. Because for him, everything was so perfectly controlled. The FBI's forensics department quickly sent the notebook to the lab for analysis. The results confirmed that the handwriting in the notebook matched Rick Harrison's signature and other documents over the years. In addition, experts analyzed the pressure and stroke frequency of the handwriting, indicating that it was natural, not forced or forged. The last page of the notebook drew a detailed diagram outlining how a transnational human trafficking network operated, recruiting victims from Eastern Europe, using fake passports through Serbia, entering the United States through Canada, and finally distributing them through transit points in Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. The points were coded, each courier was numbered, drop-off points were prioritized, and victims were categorized by age, health, English proficiency, and compliance. The notebook was not just a record of crimes, but a blueprint for an entire criminal empire. When the notebook was presented at trial, the prosecutor described it as irrefutable, incontrovertible, and unmistakable evidence. Each detail in the notebook silenced the courtroom, as if time had frozen. One juror could not bear it and left his seat. Another burst into tears as he read a description of a 13-year-old girl being trafficked to Asia with the chilling note, "High class, no pathology, good health." When asked about the notebook, Rick Harrison chose to remain absolutely silent. There was no denial or confession. His attorney argued that Rick may have been tricked and that the notebook may have been forged, but the evidence contradicted everything. The handwriting was verified, the locations matched GPS data and the victim's missing times, and the information in the notebook matched exactly with over 30 emails leaked from the Rare Find Logistics system, a front company Rick owned through 3 entities in the Cayman Islands. The notebook was more than physical evidence. It was the living ledger of a shadowy criminal organization, with no electronic copies, no servers, all written in blue ink, as a symbol of power and control. Rick trusted his notes more than his digital security system. But this complacency became his condemnation. When the notebook was made public, the case became more than an investigation. It became a fact, etched into each yellowed page. Rick Harrison's name would no longer be associated with stores or bestsellers. Instead, it will be recorded in the federal criminal record, alongside the most vicious human traffickers in modern history. What really made this case irreversible, however, was the moral testimony from those closest to Rick. When those closest to him came forward, the truth became more than just an investigation. It was the most severe punishment for the criminal's character. In court, the fatal blows came from two people, Rick's son, Corey Harrison, and Austin Chumlee Russell, his best friend and companion for years. When Corey entered the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. He was no longer the confident, witty young man the audience had come to love. Instead, he was a haggard, hollow-eyed man who walked slowly, his hands shaking as he took the stand. He was no longer Rick's son. He was the one who carried the pain and disappointment of a betrayed child. When the prosecutor asked, "Who are you?" Corey was silent for a long time, then answered with a choked voice, "I am Corey Harrison, the son of Richard Kevin Harrison." The whole courtroom fell silent. Corey recounted that from 2019, he began to notice changes in his father. Secret meetings, doors locked from the outside, something that had never happened before. "One night I went back to the store near midnight to get a computer, and I heard a baby crying from the storage room. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. The next day I asked my dad, and he just looked at me and said, 'Don't ask questions you don't want to know the answers to.' That was the first time I was afraid of him. From then on, Corey was removed from all access, his account was deleted, and he was not allowed to enter the assessment area, which Rick had completely soundproofed. It was that exclusion that made Corey decide to stand on the side of justice. One day, Corey accidentally opened a misdirected shipment. Inside were not the usual antiques, but a box of files and photos of young girls. Each photo had an identification code and their current condition. Corey was terrified. When he confronted his father, Rick coldly said, "Close it and forget what you just saw." Those words made Corey collapse. That night, he left home, cut off contact with his father, quit the TV show, and gave up the family business. While the media reported that Corey disappeared due to work conflicts, no one knew that behind his silence was a nightmare that was tearing his mind apart day by day. At the trial, when questioned by the defense attorney whether he was making up the story because of the conflict with his father, Corey just looked at Rick, who was sitting not far away, and answered, his voice choked, "I'm not making this up. This is a nightmare that I can't erase from my mind." He continued chokingly, "I don't want to believe that the father I once respected could do these things, but he never denied it. He just kept silent, and that silence was the answer." The courtroom fell into heavy silence, while Rick just looked forward, not reacting. Unlike Corey, Austin Chumlee Russell is not a family member, but he has accompanied Rick for more than 2 decades, since before the cameras appeared. On the show Pawn Stars, Chumlee is funny, clumsy, and lovable. But when he steps into the courtroom, all innocence disappears. His face hardened, no longer joking. He carried the truth heavy in his heart. Chumlee said that before he thought Rick's sneaky actions were just a trick to evade taxes or take advantage of legal loopholes, not thinking it was anything too serious. But since 2018, what he witnessed made him suspicious. There were nights when Rick came to the store at 2, 3 a.m. with a familiar driver and a white truck stopped at the back door. They unloaded unmarked wooden crates. Then Rick called and said something that Chumlee remembered clearly. "Item 27 is in storage. Dispose of discreetly." When Chumlee once jokingly asked if it was an alien artifact, Rick didn't laugh, just glared at him and said, "Don't joke about things you don't understand." Chumlee said that moment made his blood run cold. Late one night in 2021, Chumlee came home from work late at night and heard strange noises coming from the storage area. Banging, a baby crying. When he told Rick the next morning, he was told, "You must have misheard. If you're smart, don't ever mention it again." From that day on, Chumlee lived torn between loyalty and suspicion, between happy memories and what he feared he had unwittingly helped. When the mysterious notebook was made public, recording the same codes that Rick had said over the radio, Chumlee knew he couldn't keep quiet. "I used to turn a blind eye," he says, "but I can't take that guilt to the grave." Despite being attacked for his drug-related past in 2016, Chumlee stood his ground. "I made a mistake, but I've never seen a human being treated like a commodity. And when I saw it, I couldn't stay silent." Despite coming from different backgrounds, Corey and Chumlee both share one undeniable truth. They loved Rick Harrison, and now they are the ones who brought him to light. When the codes and notes matched what Rick had said over the radio, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It wasn't something I could ignore, and I couldn't take that silence with me to the grave. During cross-examination, the defense tried to use Chumlee's drug history in 2016 to discredit him. But Chumlee didn't back down. "I've made mistakes," he said, "but I've never seen anyone treated like a commodity. When I saw that, I couldn't keep quiet." Although they came from different paths, Corey and Chumlee had something in common. They had once trusted Rick Harrison, and now they were the ones who dared to bring the truth about him to light. After their testimony, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed immediately. This was no longer a simple case about money or business intrigue. It was a tragedy of betrayal. A man who had once been a father figure, a respected boss, had now quietly turned those close to him into victims of lies, fear, and silence. As the trial drew to a close, the public began to realize something bigger. Rick Harrison's actions were not just illegal, they were crimes against humanity. Then, one by one, people stood up. 7 people. And the room became a symbol of a nightmare society doesn't want to face: human trafficking. A crime so well hidden, yet the money it generates still leaves a trail, legal, clean, and seemingly untraceable. In Rick Harrison's hands, human exploitation went beyond late-night shipments and secret soundproof rooms. It became a meticulously designed, multi-layered money laundering system, cleverly disguised as a legitimate business. At the heart of the scheme was a series of shell companies, mostly registered in loosely regulated places like Nevada, Delaware, and the British Virgin Islands. Each company had a specific role: receiving money, shipping, recording expenses, and obscuring the transactions of the items. Rick's model was highly layered, making the money flow through multiple layers, obscuring the trail. A prime example was a payment of $85,000 from a European collector to Golden Ledger Holdings, one of Rick's companies. The payment was recorded as a purchase of a 19th century African tribal mask, but there was no record of its appraisal, sale, or display. After the money was received, it was routed through 2 other companies, one recorded as a storage expense, the other as a shipping expense, before being reinvested in art. Within 72 hours, the money was broken down into 5 transactions, moving through 3 banks in Cyprus, Dubai, and an unnamed country. By then, the money had become legitimate income, leaving no trace. Another method Rick used was through casinos. According to records from the Nevada Financial Controller, Rick made at least 37 high-value chip purchases over 14 months, totaling more than $350,000. The process was simple: cash in for chips, play a few low-limit games, then cash in the chips for winnings, all below the $10,000 threshold to avoid reporting. In November 2021, Rick withdrew $7,400 from 5 different ATMs each time for a total of $37,000, all below the warning threshold. But when put together, these transactions form a classic money-spattering model, similar to how drug cartels launder money. The final and most dangerous weapon is art. This has long been an area of financial control, thanks to the ambiguity of its value and lack of provenance. A painting simply labeled rare and given a rough appraisal can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. In one transaction, a sketch purported to be a Picasso 1914 sold for $120,000 through an art dealer. However, upon investigation, an expert confirmed that it was simply an internet print, aged with tea stains and sandpaper. The gold and silver porn shop was more than just a pawn shop. It actually operated as a sophisticated money laundering operation. Items were shown on television, bought for astronomical prices, and then disappeared without a trace. No resale, no storage, no proper receipts. Investigators quickly realized that the items were just a front to legitimize the flow of illegal money. A $65,000 watch was actually worth less than $3,000, but it was used to transfer money to trafficking partners in Eastern Europe. The network also included real estate, where vaults and underground rooms were disguised as commercial premises. A building in Henderson was purchased for $190,000, but just 3 months later sold for $465,000 to a Malaysian company linked to a global child trafficking network. The building was never used for its intended purpose. It was simply a vehicle for phony transactions, in which real estate values were inflated to hide ill-gotten gains. What was shocking was the global interconnectedness of the network. Investigations by the Federal Tax Investigation Bureau and Interpol revealed that at least 12 countries, including Singapore, Romania, Serbia, Belgium, and the UAE, were involved in the scheme. Each country played a part, from receiving money, moving people, forging documents, to legitimizing transactions. When the money map was presented in court, a giant diagram emerged with a series of transaction codes, arrows, and dates, all leading to a single name: Rick Harrison. He was not just the initiator, but also the coordinator of the entire network, like a CEO running a system, with specialized subsidiaries, from storage, transportation, valuation, payment, to wiping the traces. The Justice Department's financial experts have confirmed that this system could not have come about by accident. It was the product of meticulous planning, exploiting legal loopholes and hiding behind a TV celebrity. Rick Harrison raised money laundering to a fine art, and behind the funny moments and humorous deals on reality TV, there was a complex criminal network, powered by silence, fame, and dirty money. 8. The trial ended. The final verdict was delivered in the crisp January air of Nevada. It had been more than 11 months since Rick Harrison was arrested. More than 10,000 pages of documents, 97 hearings, 43 witnesses, and 4 victims had been brought before the court. This trial was not about one individual. Everyone understood that Rick Harrison was the symbol of a system of open crime, where evil no longer had to hide, but was dressed in a glamorous television cover. The courtroom was silent as the judge rose. Before him was not just a sentence of a man, but a powerful statement of facts. After listing the full list of charges ranging from human trafficking, money laundering, false imprisonment, to running an organized crime organization, he announced, "Given the gravity of the offense, the number of victims, and the overwhelming evidence, the court sentenced Richard Kevin Harrison, a.k.a. Rick Harrison, to death by lethal injection." There was no applause, no cheers, only a choked sigh from the back row, where the family of one of the victims had sat, and silent tears. Rick sat silently. He did not protest, did not defend himself, did not show remorse. Perhaps he knew it was all over when the evidence was clear. His own notebook, a cell built right under his office, and a series of financial transactions bearing his name. The media broadcast the trial live as a global event. Major news outlets ran sensational headlines: TV star Rick Harrison from icon to death penalty. Outrage quickly spread across forums, social media, and political commentary programs. Criticism mounted over the leniency of society toward celebrities and the indifference of the entertainment industry to clear warning signs. The question kept ringing: how could this case have gone on for so many years without anyone noticing? Urgent hearings were held in the U.S. Congress. A group of lawmakers proposed new laws requiring expanded background checks on television companies and independent entertainment entities. At the same time, the United Nations Human Rights Council called for an international investigation into the cross-border network involved in the Rick Harrison case. What started as a simple criminal case quickly grew into a global scandal involving abuse of power, media manipulation, and commercial conspiracies. But amid all the legal, political, and institutional backlash, Rick Harrison's fans were the most pitiful victims. Not only did they lose their beloved reality TV show, they also had to face the harsh truth. Under the bright spotlight, sometimes there are dark, cruel shadows that are hard to imagine. Rick Harrison's story is more than just a star's fall. It is a warning about the power, the aura, and the terrifying silence that the media can maintain for years. Because behind every bright smile on screen, there may be a truth that has been buried for too long. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Thank you for watching. After years of silence, Deanna Burdett, Rick Harrison's ex-wife, has finally spoken out, revealing shocking secrets about the man who was once considered an icon in the pawnbroking world. Her recent shares have not only shocked the public, but also shaken the image that Rick has worked so hard to build over the years. What has been revealed has opened up a hidden corner that few people expected, causing many people to reevaluate the real person behind the halo. After years of silence, Deanna Burdett, the ex-wife of Rick Harrison, a familiar face on Pawn Stars and owner of the famous gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas, suddenly broke her silence with shocking revelations in the midst of a tense legal battle, shaking public opinion across the United States. In February 2025, Rick Harrison's federal trial officially took place in Las Vegas, attracting a lot of attention from the public and the media. The man who was once loved for his image as a funny, savvy businessman on television now faced 3 serious charges: tax evasion, illegal trafficking of antiquities, and cross-border truck smuggling. Prosecutor Laura Martinez opened with sharp arguments, arguing that Rick used his pawn shop to cover up a series of illegal activities. She presented evidence that Rick had made $2.7 million in undeclared transactions between 2018 and 2023, and presented a shipment of 9th-century Mayan ceramics that were allegedly illegally sourced, which Rick had purchased through a questionable intermediary in 2022. Encrypted emails between Rick and a European dealer were also revealed, revealing an undocumented import of ancient bronze statues, raising suspicions of smuggling. The IRS further increased pressure by providing a report that Rick had transferred $1.5 million to an account in the Cayman Islands to avoid tax authorities' scrutiny. Meanwhile, archaeologist Dr. Emily Torres asserted that the ceramics were likely illegally mined from the Yucatan region, a serious violation of the UNESCO Convention on the Protection of Cultural Heritage. The tension in the trial grew when emails recovered from Rick's personal computer revealed that he had spent $200,000 on a batch of bronze statues without proper documentation. However, the biggest shock came from the testimony of Deanna Burdett and Mike Larson, a former employee of the pawn shop. Mike recounted a transaction worth more than $250,000 that Rick requested be done entirely in cash and ordered not to be recorded in the books to avoid the attention of the tax authorities. He admitted that he felt concerned, but did not dare to object because it was a direct order from his superiors. However, Rick's defense team, led by veteran attorney James Whitaker, strongly disputed the allegations. Whitaker argued that the allegations were a misunderstanding or an unintentional accounting error. He argued that Rick's shop had been inspected by the IRS several times but had not found any serious violations. Regarding the Mexican antiques, he affirmed that the transaction had clear invoices, only admitting that some procedures may have been incomplete. Regarding the emails, Whitaker emphasized that Rick's computer system was hacked in 2021 and did not rule out the possibility that the data was edited. He also openly questioned the reliability of Mike Larson's testimony, saying that he had personal conflicts after being fired for reasons related to theft. This trial is not simply a confrontation before the law, but also exposes the dark side behind the image that Rick Harrison has carefully built in the public eye for many years. Hidden secrets are gradually revealed, and this lawsuit will certainly continue to attract close attention from the public around the world. The trial culminated on the 10th day when Rick took the stand in person. With a calm but emotional demeanor, he denied all accusations, asserting that his gold and silver pawn shop operated completely legally and transparently. Rick explained that the money transferred abroad was for legitimate real estate investments, and the antiques in question were purchased through reputable brokers. When questioned about the encrypted emails, he quickly denied, "I don't know anything about them. Someone deliberately set me up." However, his answer about the unrecorded transactions raised many questions in the courtroom. At the end of his testimony, Rick shared about the painful loss of his family when his son Adam passed away in 2024. He said that he had experienced too many tragedies and affirmed that he was not a criminal. However, these words continuously caused skepticism in the hearts of those listening. Just when it seemed like the trial was coming to a close, a surprise witness appeared on the 15th day, Deanna Burdett, Rick's ex-wife. Her testimony immediately sent shockwaves through the entire courtroom, revealing shocking secrets about Rick and the real reason behind their divorce. Deanna recounted that throughout their marriage, she witnessed suspicious shipments of antiques being moved into the store through the back door at night without any official records. One time, she discovered a secret safe in Rick's office in 2019, filled with documents about international transactions worth millions of dollars. "Rick told me it was private business, but I knew something was wrong," she shared with a shudder. Although she claimed not to be involved, Deanna said she felt a responsibility to speak up for the truth. She provided the FBI with a handwritten memo from 2018 that listed antique transactions that did not match the store's official records. She also revealed how Rick had bragged about evading taxes through shell companies in Panama. These statements were completely contradictory to Rick's claims, creating a tense courtroom debate. Although Rick's legal team, led by attorney James Whitaker, tried to discredit Deanna, calling her a vengeful ex-wife out for revenge, her testimony caused a major shock. When Prosecutor Martinez asked her why she waited so long to speak up, Deanna replied, "I was afraid of retaliation, but I couldn't stay silent when I knew the truth." Deanna's subsequent testimony further heightened the tension in the trial. She recounted that she had heard Rick and his son, Corey Harrison, arguing over a shipment of Swiss watches that had been stuck in customs. Rick had instructed, "Call your guy at the airport, move it to the old warehouse, mark it as Utah inventory. Don't let the auditors know." Corey, Rick's only son, was now embroiled in the case. Deanna claimed that Corey not only knew but actively participated in cleaning up the origins of the goods, sometimes making large cash transactions to protect his father. She recounted witnessing Rick hand Corey a sum of cash and say, "Handle Reno, then bring me the fake receipt." This testimony prompted an FBI attorney to request an expanded investigation of Corey Harrison, not only as a witness, but also as a potential suspect in money laundering and antiquities smuggling operations. Judge Albright, after a closed-door meeting with attorneys, decided to adjourn the trial for 10 days to allow the FBI to gather more evidence and give the jury time to digest the new revelations. The courtroom exploded, and the media called it an earthquake, as what started as a tax fraud case turned into a cross-border smuggling case involving 2 generations of the Harrison family. The public was quickly divided. Loyal Harrison fans claimed it was a smear campaign, while many others believed Deanna had exposed their true colors. Deanna declined to be interviewed, but she released a statement through her attorney. "I just want justice to be served." So where will the investigation go? Will Corey Harrison face further charges? These questions remain unanswered, and the public is anxiously awaiting further developments. Rick Harrison, born in 1965 in Lexington, North Carolina, grew up in a family of 4 siblings. After his family suffered financial setbacks due to a failed real estate investment in 1981, they moved to Las Vegas. There, along with his father, Richard Boldman Harrison, Rick began working at a small coin and antique shop, which became the foundation for a business empire. This shop later evolved into the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, one of the most famous pawn shops in Las Vegas. At first, the business was nothing special, simply buying cheap goods and reselling them to tourists. However, Rick quickly demonstrated his outstanding talent in appraising the value of items and detecting counterfeits. By 1989, the shop was officially licensed as a pawn shop and began a period of strong growth. Thanks to his business acumen, Rick turned the store into a Las Vegas landmark, with sales of over $3 million a year by 2005. Another milestone in Rick's career came in 2009 when he signed a contract with the History Channel after years of toying with the idea of a television show. The show Pawn Stars was born, marking a major turning point in his career. This is an unscripted reality show focusing on buying, selling, appraising, and negotiating antiques. The overwhelming success of Pawn Stars not only helped Rick build a business empire, but also helped him make his mark on television, becoming an icon of popular culture. With his popularity, Rick received a series of advertising contracts, from razors to household appliances, and guest starred on popular shows such as The Middle and iCarly. However, despite his great success in his career, Rick's personal life has become unfamiliar to the public. From 2011 to 2016, Rick was married to Deanna Burdett. During these years, his schedule was always packed with media events, book signings, and brand promotions. Deanna, despite being Rick's legal wife, never appeared on Pawn Stars. She always stayed out of Rick's official story and felt like an extra in a big show where all the important decisions were controlled by Rick, from vacations to financial transactions. According to Deanna, their married life was not a real family, but more like a play where everything revolved around Rick's career and image. Deanna revealed that during their nearly decade-long marriage, Rick not only cheated on her financially, but also had relationships with other women whom he called business partners. She recalls finding shady text messages, hotel receipts, and even witnessing Rick leaving a nightclub with a strange woman just weeks after their wedding anniversary. When confronted, Rick simply laughed and said, "Don't believe everything you see. I'm a public figure." Now, however, the public has seen the whole truth. Deanna also shared that Rick was often absent from Pawn Stars events without her. Although she was initially promised to be a part of the shows backstage, every invitation was rescinded, and she was gradually pushed out. Looking back, Deanna realizes that their life together was not what people saw on television, and she couldn't continue to live in the shadow of a marriage that wasn't truly taken seriously. Things came to a head when Rick asked Deanna to stay away from the media, not be photographed, and not attend public events, all in the name of protecting her personal image. According to Deanna, their family life gradually became a series of lonely days. Although she had 3 children from a previous marriage, Rick never really bonded with them. He was not hostile, but he was not warm either, simply a distant presence on holidays, birthdays, and Thanksgivings. There were no special moments or meaningful involvement from Rick. Deanna tried to save the relationship, even suggesting marital therapy, but Rick flatly refused, claiming that it was her problem, not his. Gradually, they almost stopped communicating meaningfully. Although living with a successful man, Deanna felt like a stranger in her own home. When asked why she decided to speak out after years of silence, Deanna shared that she had kept quiet out of respect for Rick's privacy and, more importantly, to protect her children. However, when all the limits were crossed, she felt she could no longer remain silent. "I think I deserve to speak out at least once so the world can see his true face," she said. Many people supported Deanna, saying that she was too patient and had the right to tell her story. But there were also many opposing opinions, criticizing her for choosing a sensitive time to speak out, when Rick was facing scandal and loss of freedom. However, behind the spotlight there are always dark corners, and in the darkness are little-known stories about Rick Harrison's personal life. Rick's first marriage to Kim Harrison, when he was just 18 years old, lasted through difficult years as he sought to find his footing in Las Vegas. Kim is the mother of Rick's 2 sons, Corey and Adam. However, The marriage only lasted 3 years before Kim withdrew from the public eye completely and lived a quiet life away from the limelight. Then, in 1986, Rick married Tracy Harrison, who became his longest-term partner. They had a son together, Jake Harrison, and Tracy was involved in the management of the pawn shop in the time before the popular TV show. However, as Rick's career took off, Tracy was gradually forgotten. She did not appear at events, was not mentioned in interviews, and was largely forgotten in the success story she had helped build. According to those close to them, the biggest conflict between Rick and Tracy was Rick's constant absence. He rarely participated in important family moments, from holiday gatherings to parent-teacher conferences. Tracy had to juggle everything from motherhood to wifehood all on her own, while maintaining a quiet support system. After their divorce in 2011, Rick and Tracy closed the chapter of their lives without any major property disputes. Their life together, like their marriage of more than 2 decades, ended quietly. By early 2012, Rick went public with his relationship with Deanna Burdett, who brought 3 daughters into his life. They married in July 2013. During their 7 years together, Rick and Deanna had no children together. Deanna shared that their relationship never really felt like a family. Rick rarely mentioned her at public events, and despite living under the same roof, Deanna always felt left out, unacknowledged, unshared, and nameless. After ending his marriage to Deanna, Rick surprised the public by marrying Amanda Palmer in 2021. However, this marriage only lasted about 2 years, becoming one of his shortest marriages. Amanda never appeared with Rick at public events, and there was no clear trace of her in the media. Some sources in Las Vegas said that the separation between them stemmed from fundamental differences in lifestyle. While Amanda wanted a quiet and stable life, Rick continued to expand his television empire and brand. In addition to the breakups, Rick Harrison's life was also associated with deep tragedies. The first great pain came on June 25, 2018, when his father, Richard Boldman Harrison, passed away at the age of 77 after a long battle with Parkinson's disease. Gold and silver pawn shop co-founder and Rick's mentor, Old Man, was an integral part of Rick's life. "He was the best dad, my best friend," Rick shared on Instagram. "I will miss him forever." The loss was a huge blow to Rick, especially as he continued to run the shop while Pawn Stars was still at its peak. The emptiness and sadness he felt for his father sent him into a mild depression, often visiting the shop late at night to chat with his favorite items. However, the tragedy was not over yet. On January 19, 2024, Rick's second son, Adam Harrison, died at the age of 39 from a drug overdose. Adam, who rarely appeared on television, lived a quiet life and stayed out of the public eye. His relationship with Rick grew distant due to their different lifestyles, which made Rick even more heartbreaking when he received the news of Adam's death. Rick shared in an Instagram post, "My son Adam is gone forever. Be careful with drugs. They take the people you love." In a 2024 interview, he confided, "I never thought I would lose Adam to drugs. I wish I had done more." Adam's death was not only a painful loss, but also a wake-up call about the dangers of drugs. After Adam's death, Rick began to change. Although he remained strong on the outside, the sadness and regret from the loss of his son affected him deeply. Rick began to speak out about drugs and became a spokesperson for anti-fentanyl campaigns. However, his strong statements caused the public to question their relationship. Over the years, Rick rarely mentioned Adam and never allowed him to appear on the show Pawn Stars, even though he was his son. That silence led many to question the authenticity of their father-son relationship. A former member of the Pawn Stars production team shared, "We hardly ever heard Rick mention Adam. It was only Corey and the scenes with Chumlee." This further increased the skepticism and division among the public, especially when Rick began to appear more in the media after Adam's death. However, the tragedies in Rick's life were not over yet. In late 2025, a new lawsuit may drag his eldest son, Corey Harrison, into the legal battle. Corey, Rick's longtime co-star on Pawn Stars and an integral part of the family store, is indicted in connection with illegal antique transactions that Rick may have orchestrated. After a series of tragedies, Rick Harrison not only faces deep personal pain, but also tough legal battles. From the death of his father, Richard Harrison, to the loss of his son Adam to drug addiction, and now the legal battle with his eldest son Corey, the entire Rick family seems to be caught in an inescapable spiral. After Adam's death, Rick is deeply saddened, but the tragedy does not stop there. When Corey is accused of engaging in illegal transactions, Rick faces an internal battle bigger than ever. In December 2025, in the Clark County Courthouse, Rick is once again caught in a tense legal battle. His son Corey faces serious charges related to tax evasion, antiques trafficking, and illegal transactions. Evidence, including encrypted emails and important documents, was found by the FBI during a raid on Rick's home in September 2025, making matters worse. A USB drive containing information about illegal financial transactions and suspected stolen antiques raised suspicions about the involvement of both Rick and his father in criminal activities. Prosecutor Laura Martinez strongly criticized Corey, accusing him of being an accomplice in Rick's crimes. Evidence, including emails, showed that Rick directed his son to avoid tax issues and conceal shipments of stolen antiques. Corey Harrison is not just a victim. He is a co-conspirator in his father's criminal empire, Martinez declared in the courtroom. These words caused public outrage, putting Corey in an extremely difficult position. However, Corey's defense team, led by Rebecca Stein, presented a counter-argument. Ms. Stein asserted that Corey did not initiate these actions, but was merely following his father's orders. She stressed that the emails and documents were not enough to prove Corey's active participation in important decisions, as he was merely an executioner. She also cited the personal tragedies Corey had endured over the years, including the deaths of his grandfather and brother, as reasons for the community to understand and sympathize with him. The tension was palpable throughout the trial. The pain of Rick Harrison, who had seen his family fall apart and be swept up in the legal maelstrom, became increasingly apparent. No longer the strong man the public once knew, he was now facing irreparable losses. The exhaustion and remorse in his eyes were evident as he watched his son face serious charges, while he himself was suffering from the pain of his past. Witnesses played a key role in the trial, giving controversial testimony. Rick's ex-wife, Deanna Burdett, rocked the courtroom by claiming that Corey knew about the hidden safe and even helped Rick check the documents in 2019. She recalled Corey saying when he asked him to hide the deal, "Dad knows best." Sarah Mitchell, a store employee, also testified that Corey received Mayan ceramics from a Mexican dealer in 2021 without asking for proper paperwork. However, Austin Chumley Russell, a close friend of Corey's, came to his defense, claiming that Corey was constantly pressured by Rick and had no choice but to comply. These conflicting testimonies left the jury pondering whether Corey was a willing accomplice or a victim of blind loyalty. On day 10, Corey took the stand, thin and shaken. He admitted that he knew about some of the undocumented transactions, but insisted that he was only acting on his father's orders. "I don't think that's wrong," he said. When asked about the emails, Corey stammered, "I don't remember writing them. Dad handled everything." He choked up when he mentioned his deceased brother Adam and expressed fear at the prospect of losing his father. Corey's emotional testimony drew sympathy from many, but his vague answers undermined the defense's case. Rick Harrison was also called to clarify Corey's role. Despite taking full responsibility, Rick tried to defend his son, claiming that Corey knew nothing about taxes or the origins of the antiques. But emails presented at trial showed a contradiction, with one message from Rick asking Corey to safe handle the Guatemala shipment. After 5 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict on the afternoon of December 20th, 2025. Corey Harrison, star of Pawn Stars and son of Rick Harrison, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for conspiracy to evade taxes and possession of stolen property. The biggest shock, however, was the sentence handed down to Rick Harrison, the founder of Pawn Stars and icon of a television empire. Rick was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole as the mastermind behind a network of tax fraud, money laundering, and illegal property transactions. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. Rick, dressed in a black suit, showed no emotion, just sat motionless, his hands clasped as if in prayer. Corey burst into tears as he stood next to his lawyer. As Rick was escorted out of the courtroom, Corey tried to run to him but was stopped by security. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know anything." His voice echoed through the room, a tragic end to a family crushed under the weight of justice. Shortly after the verdict, the History Channel announced that it would cancel Pawn Stars permanently, with all episodes that had aired or were scheduled to air in the future removed from online platforms. At the same time, the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, a popular Las Vegas landmark, was sealed by the IRS pending further investigation. Preliminary reports suggest that many of the antiques in the warehouse that had never been aired may have been of illegal origin. The public reaction was strong and divided. A wave of fans expressed sympathy for Corey, with the hashtag #JusticeForcy quickly trending. Many saw Corey as a victim of a powerful father, caught up in a world he had no control over. Others, however, criticized Corey for his blind loyalty, claiming that he knew better but kept quiet. Austin Chumley Russell, a close friend of both Rick and Corey, remained silent throughout the trial. However, after the verdict, he posted an old photo on Instagram with the caption, "I lost 2 of my best friends. I just want the store back to how it used to be." The photo received millions of likes, and the comments were filled with pain, anger, and nostalgia for the past. With this verdict, Rick and Corey Harrison will face the harsh reality of prison, where inmates are not easily forgiving. Rick Harrison, now 60, is currently incarcerated at the Nevada Federal Penitentiary, a medium-security facility. Once an icon in the pawnbroking world, Rick now faces hostility from inmates who do not forgive him for the fame and wealth he has amassed. In one incident in February 2026, he was attacked by a group of inmates in the yard and suffered 2 broken ribs as they mocked him for being a wealthy tax evader. The once respected man now lives in fear, isolation, and remorse. During his long days in prison, the physical pain has become a constant torment of guilt that haunts Rick's mind. A fictional letter he sent to his son, Corey, is filled with regret. "I deserved it. I ruined everything, son." Corey Harrison, 42, is also serving time at another Nevada prison. Though younger and stronger than his father, he is not immune to the contemptuous stares and the label of a con man's son. A recent bullying incident left him scarred on the forehead when a lunch tray was thrown at him. The inmates call him a loyal fool who dares not see the truth, leaving Corey in constant fear. Both father and son face the darkness of prison life. Rick, once a figurehead of a pawnshop empire, is now reduced to 4 cold walls and no fans to share his story with. Long nights in his cell give him time to reflect on his mistakes. Corey, who was groomed to take over the family's legendary pawnshop, now faces an uncertain future. Prison life is more than just violence. It is also a spiritual emptiness, a place without purpose, without hope. In moments of reflection, both Rick and Corey realize that what they have lost can never be regained. Rick remembers the days when the pawn shop was the pride of the family, now a distant, painful memory. Once a symbol, they are now a cautionary tale of the costs of blind loyalty, bottomless greed, and terrifying